And good morning, all. My name is Teresa Best Downs. I am the Episcopal Delegate for Youth of the Catholic Youth Commission and also a graduate of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies. And I'd like to welcome you once again to another SALISES virtual forum. Today we have a very exciting topic, and it begs the question, what influences development? And for people like us in Trinidad and Tobago and in the rest of the region, where we have many different religious value systems, how do we determine the path to sustainable development? So for today's virtual forum, we will be discussing the topic, anchoring sustainable development through spirituality, religion, morality in the Caribbean, small island developing states. I want to welcome all of you all here today, but particularly I would like to welcome our panelists that will be sharing with us on this topic. At this point in time, I want to hand over to Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, the Acting Director of the SALISES at the St. Augustine campus, to give us our opening remarks.
Thank you, and good morning to all of our virtual participants. Again, it gives me great pleasure to welcome each and every one of you. I should say good afternoon and good evening, because I am also aware that there are virtual participants as far as India. So again, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. It gives me great pleasure, as I said before, to welcome each and every one of you to this, our 17th in our series of virtual webinars targeting topical issues that are relevant to sustainable development in Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean region, and indeed internationally. We at SALISES pride ourselves as being the think tank that you should turn to whenever you want to embark on studies or embark on research or promote research related to issues pertaining to development studies. Today's topic, anchoring sustainable development through spirituality, religion, and morality in Caribbean SIDS. This is a topic that I have always wanted to embrace in these webinars. And I have always wanted to embrace this topic in these webinars because when we look at development discourses, we often find that there isn't much mention, albeit, mention being made to various aspects and dynamics associated with cultural antecedents. There isn't that much that comes to the fore when one thinks in terms of spirituality, religion, and morality, and how those virtues impact sustainable development in various spaces. So I thought it was necessary that SALISES take the mantle and, run with it insofar as bringing to the fore a number of critical speakers who can address these issues frontally. And I dare say, given the breadth of concerns and of course insights that could impact, these kinds of discussions, this is just part one of a two-part series looking at anchoring sustainable development through spirituality, religion, morality in Caribbean SIDS. So we are hoping that in May, the last Friday of May 2023, we shall have our second installment of this important discussion, and you will hear from a number of other speakers. Of course, when we think in terms of development, oftentimes we think in terms of, the accumulation of material wealth. But it's not only about material wealth. There's a spiritual dimension to development, and there's a spiritual dimension to wealth as well. And it's not only about the accumulation of such wealth, regardless of the capital that is essential in the investment that redounds to the accumulation of such wealth. We often talk of various capitals: produced capital, financial capital, natural capital, human capital, social capital. All of those are critical capitals that impact the accumulation of wealth. But quite apart from the accumulation of wealth, we also have to be concerned about virtues of equality. And even when there is equality, in the absence of justice mechanisms that can really ensure that everyone has equal access and equal opportunity and equal condition, I think, we also have to think about equity and how we can promote, not just equality, but more so equity. So all of these are elements of the development discourse that, we have to embrace. And I think, quite apart from all of the other antecedent factors that we often embrace when we talk and engage in discourses on development paradigms, we ought to really begin to think about how do we frame development that takes into account, these virtues that are central to today's discussion: spirituality, religion, morality. And this is not something that we are somewhat inventing at this point in time, because as far back as the 19th century, sociological thinkers such as Durkheim, Marx, and Weber, they had conceptions and they embraced paradigms. Durkheim embraced structural functionalism, Marx embraced critical conflict theory, and Weber embraced interpretive sociology. And within the confines of their respective paradigms, they focused in some of their writings on how religion impacted development. Of course, when we think of Durkheim, Durkheim's emphasis in structural functionalism was about, the whole idea of a collective consciousness, so to speak. And in terms of religion, he focused specifically on rituals and ideas of the sacred and the profane within mechanic and organic societies, and dependent on whether organic mechanical solidarity prevailed, and that transition to organic solidarity, to what extent there would have been a transition from the sacred to the profane, and what impact that had in terms of deregulation and harmonious relations in society. And these were some of his predictions back then. Of course, Karl Marx, in his work where he emphasized religion, he saw religion as the opium of the people, and religion as a tool that, permitted, that oppression between the bourgeoisie and the working class, and it permitted the persistence of it. Of course, all this has to be viewed in the context of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, and of course, the fact that the space in which these references were made was primarily European society around the time of the Enlightenment. And of course, Weber spoke about, his popular work on the Protestant ethic and basically the various characteristics that are associated with Protestant groups and at that time, and how that ethic was somewhat associated with thrift, and how thrift, in a sense, was responsible for the evolution of what we call today capitalist society, capitalism, so to speak. So the whole idea of religion has been really central to a lot of the discourses that prevailed back in the 19th century. Of course, with time and the emergent scholarship, there have been refinements of those discourses. But I think, today's discussion will certainly help us to anchor our thoughts and stimulate that movement that could eventually see, based on insights that emerge out of these discussions and the ones in May, what can we do by way of embracing these important issues to see to what extent, they do have an impact in producing positive outcomes for us. So today we have with us Dr. Latoya Lazarus and Dr. Nasser Mustapha, two of my dear UE colleagues, the former hailing from the Keyville campus in Barbados and the latter a recent retiree from the St. Augustine campus. We also have my elder college mate, Pastor Clive Dottin, who has graciously agreed to participate in today's discussion. We have a presentation that has been recorded from the Archbishop Jason Gordon, Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Church, the Archbishop of Port of Spain. And we are happy to have his presentation. And of course, his presentation will be supported by the presence of Mr. Darian Narain, who is going to be around to support his presentation. We do have Mr. Ravindra Nath Maharaj, who will represent the Hindu community, Namaskar, sir. And we do have Miss Eintou Springer, an elder from the Ifa Orisa community speaking, as well as Mr. Ricardo Bharat Hernandez, chief of the Santa Rosa First Peoples. So we are really happy that these colleagues have graciously agreed to participate in our event and really bring value to the discussions here this morning. And we look forward to a really positive and progressive event as it unfolds. So having said that, I want to thank everyone for their presence today. And we here at SALISES in St. Augustine, as well as our sister campuses in Keyville and Mona, we are really pleased to have all of you participating and witnessing today's event. So thank you very much. And again, that's my welcome. And I turn over to the chairperson for her to commence the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. St. Bernard. So let's get directly into the discussions. Just as a note, all presenters will be presenting for 10 minutes, and we are going to ensure that we have some time to handle questions at the end. So please stick around for the Q&A session. Let's begin with Dr. Latoya Lazarus, who will be doing a theoretical reflection for us. Dr. Lazarus obtained her PhD in sociology from York University with a focus on cultures and identities. Her research interests are in the fields of sociology of religion, citizenship, gender, and sexuality studies. Specifically, her research grapples with the question of the ongoing but changing role of Christianity in the Anglophone Caribbean, especially as it relates to social justice, law reform, and the interpretations of international human rights discourses within the region. She has published under the titles Religion and Rights, Is There Still Room for Christianity at the Table? And Enacting Citizenship, Debating Sex and Sexuality, Conservative Christians' Participation in Legal Processes in Jamaica and Belize. Dr. Lazarus is currently a member of the Religion and Gender Working Group, which was established by the Institute of Gender, the Anita Barrow Unit, and a research fellow of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at the University of the West Indies Keyville campus. So welcome, Dr. Lazarus, and I turn over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Godfrey Bernard and St. Bernard and your team for the invitation to join the panel this morning. When you asked me to speak about a theoretical perspective and said I had 10 minutes, it was quite a lot. So obviously I can't provide a synopsis a synopsis in that period, but I will try to highlight some of the areas that I think are most relevant to this discussion around development and sustainable development. So when we're discussing sustainable development and religion and spirituality, it's very crucial that we consider the social context in which these things are unfolding. Right now, in Western societies, including the Caribbean, we see shifting religious landscapes, and that's nothing new, right? Different groups will remain in power, different groups will fade out at times, and new groups will be introduced. So currently in the United States, for example, recent census data shows that a lot of young people are leaving organized, established religions. But at the same time, we see a very involved very, what do I say, political involvement of religious groups in the public life within America. So that there's that kind of troubling of both silencing in one set, but also a politicization of religion. We see similar things across Europe and in other contexts. In the Caribbean, we don't have these kind of large scale census, but we do also observe shifting religious landscapes. For example, in some countries like Jamaica and elsewhere, we see that there is, the mainline Christian churches, as they were called, those churches that were here from the inception of colonialism, we see that they may be losing numerical numbers and other churches are coming in. So all this context is important, and it's important to emphasize that within our region, as previously stated, religion is not homogeneous, neither is spirituality, and neither is spirituality and religion necessarily one and the same, right? The spirituality may be informed by religion, but may come from elsewhere. And these things are important in considering development and what exactly is informing development. And so we have to take into consideration that the heterogeneous state of religion, even within denominations, even within a religious group, there are multiple perspectives on Christianity, multiple perspectives in Islam's, and all these viewpoints are coming to the table or seeking to come to the table on the public table and present various views. And that can be both beneficial, but also problematic for development. And as we said, also development is complex. What kind of development are we speaking about? So in my research, we look at the ways in which development around gender and sexuality may pose certain challenges for certain religious groups and voices, especially as it pertains to reproductive and sexual rights. Right. And that's an area where, as a region, we are seeing that discussion becoming more divisive for people. But exactly where it's exactly where it's going is still up to debate. And is the answer to exclude religious groups? It may not be. And I'm going into that now, looking at the theorization. So we see throughout history that religion, and at times it wasn't religion in the earlier centuries, it was just way of life, of influence what we would today call development. If you look at early development practices, they very much look like missionary kind of discourses. Right? We're coming to a region, we're going to help with charity. We're helping those who are less fortunate to catch up, and you will get a reward. At various times in history, religion was actively, you could see the explicit influence in development policy. But at some period in history, and we're looking, and I can turn directly after World War II, we see religion, organized religion took a background, right? Wasn't so explicit, the influence. In fact, religion by many theorists started to be, constructed and seen as tradition, backward looking. in fact, seen as in opposition to development for human beings' advancement, right? So there was a view that development, that religion and spirituality had no place in development, that religion and spirituality must take to the background, must at best be in the private and not in public life. Of course, Dr. St. Bernard spoke about Weber and Durkheim and all those dead Europeans. And no offense, I draw and I see the usefulness as a sociologist. I was schooled in those thinking, but I say when we think about Caribbean development and development for small island states, the importance of a decolonial analysis of religion is important, right? Religion and spirituality in our region have both been complicit with reinforcing certain kind of power status quo, right? Has been complicit in the oppression of many people. But at the same time, religion has also been very integral to decolonial movements and spirituality. Religion, certain aspects of it, that is, religion has been integral in filling the gaps when development or organized development policies have failed, right? It is religion that we turn to when the state oftentimes cannot fulfill its welfare duties. And that has been the history of post-colonial states like ours and in other places as well. And this is religion, not just Christianity, but all religious groups have been called upon to provide material kind of resources, but also spiritual guidance. And the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted this complexity around religion globally, right? It highlighted that religion, though people see it as privatized, it's been painted as problematic, has no place in public life, that religion still has a role to play and plays many roles and complex roles within life, and spirituality as well, because people may not identify as religious, but may depend upon a notion of spirituality for some of these various things that religion also offers. Community, cohesiveness, sense, meaning making, all of those things. So during COVID-19, we see that religion was important for helping people to make sense of what was happening. Right? It helped people to navigate, to understand religion and spirituality, to navigate and to understand religion. In the cases of the Caribbean, I'm using Barbados as an example, religion and spirituality was often mobilized by state and medical personnel at times when it seemed as if science was failing. Right? When there was no answer, when people were in despair, when you didn't know what the answer was to, is the vaccine working, or what do we do next? Even before the vaccine, the cases are raising. People were called upon by the state leaders. Religion was mobilized and used that way to provide hope for people. When the welfare state and, people out of a job and we don't have enough money and material, religion and religious groups were called upon to aid, right? To provide that kind of not just spiritual sources of strength, but also material respite and also in education. So these are the complexities around religion. So how do we use religion, and religion, does it serve any purpose? More and more, as we are seeing that a number of NGOs, including the United Nations, have been trying to include religion in discussions around development and in actual implementation of development. The Tony Blair Institute, for example, says that religion is important for sensitizing the population, but also through collaboration, active collaboration. Religious leaders and communities are often the ones who know about who are the most vulnerable in their communities, right? They're the ones who are sometimes one of the groups that are most likely to recognize who are in need. They also may, as we saw in COVID-19, translate certain discourses, and that translation can be problematic, but also beneficial. So by no means am I saying that religious intervention is without problems or unproblematic. But religion does serve its purpose in development. Religion adds values. It helps with one sense of self, identity formation, helps us to interpret events, including how we interpret and understand notions of human rights and justice, right? Helps us to situate ourselves as citizens and as belonging to this place. So I want to say that religion may have a place, but considering that religion is not homogeneous and that there are different kind of contributions, there are certain things that must be taken into consideration. And one of my questions that I've often have is, how do religious players and spiritual leaders help to shape development, considering that both development and religion and spirituality are intended to advance human life, right? How do they work together to achieve that goal? Is a question that remains with us. How do we center the human and those, especially the most vulnerable in needs, despite our various ideological view perspectives, right? And I think that is the question that is at the present at the center of Caribbean development when it comes on to what role can religion and spirituality play going forward. They've always played the need of providing spiritual support as well as some material support, but how can they help providing ideological support, right, around issues of justice, fairness, respect, dignity? These are all things that are across a number of religious teachings, right? But we do not see it necessarily translate when we discuss certain notions around development. So that's where I would leave my 2 cents. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lazarus, for that wonderful opening overview. And I already see there are lots of comments going on in the chat, and we thank our participants for that. Know that the questions will be taken in the order in which we get them once we get to the Q&A. So I want to move on to Dr. Clive Dottin and welcome him to make his presentation, Countering Immorality and Decay in Caribbean Societies. So in Trinidad, we affectionately call him Pastor Clive, and Pastor Clive Dottin is the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director of the Caribbean Union Conference of the Seventh-day Adventists. He worked as a teacher in 2 schools, Maraca Seventh-day Adventist Primary and the Bharat Junior Secondary School, where he taught integrated science. He has a diploma in elementary teacher education and a BA in theology from the University of the Southern Caribbean and a master's in public health from Loma Linda University. He has formed several support group ministries, including Heart to Heart, Dream Team, Friends Forever, CUP, which refers to Courage, Unlimited Please, and the Group Effort. These groups focus on drug addicts, AIDS patients, students in secondary schools who need special counseling, victims of abuse, depressed youth, gang members, and the unemployed. He is the chairperson of the board that manages the Reedy Rehabilitation Center, which is located in Matura, Trinidad. This institution is designed to assist addicts in the process of recovery from the disease of drug addiction through discovering their talents and skills. It also helps them to develop a relationship with God. Welcome, Pastor Clive.
Thank you very much. And I must say welcome to all of my colleagues and those who are playing a very significant role, including the first speaker, Dr. Lazarus. I must accuse her, though, of helping me to knock out my first paragraph when she spoke about the pandemic and the role of religion in helping people navigate through a crisis. And if you remember the early days of the pandemic, you would recognize that people were losing hope faster than Usain Bolt could run 100 meters, in athletics. So that therefore I'm privileged. I thank you and Sister Dongs and of course Sister Kathleen Modest and those who are here, my good younger colleague, Dr. Sen Bernard. It is a privilege to be here. I'm just back from India, I should tell you, and I had a wonderful time there. And that is exactly where I want to start with Mahatma Gandhi as we deal with this here anchoring sustainable development through a process of values, all right, that should become permanent. And Dr. Lazarus did hint at it in terms of the loss, of religion, the loss of membership to religion, and people sometimes turn away from religion because they believe they're not getting the hope and the response to their challenges in this postmodern society. Gandhi said, and I want to quote him here, as I focus on three major values, and that is courage, nobility, and compassion for anchoring sustainable development. Gandhi said, you know, we do not kill our enemies, but we kill their desire to kill. I found that is such a wonderful expression in terms of, you know, the development of values that would move away. You know, in Trinidad, we have so much hate and revenge, and we're so politically and culturally sometimes divisive. That is important to know that we have to love each other. And the golden rule, which is a Christian plank, you know, and pillar and foundational pillar, talks to the issue of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So if we examine the Quran and the Gita and the Bible, we see some values coming to us in a very specific way. Of course, Orwell said the further society drifts from the truth, the more it hates those who speak it. No less a person than the Honorable Prime Minister has spoken about when you have a plural society, how it's difficult to govern. You know, and I am saying that plurality in the truest sense of religion. You know, I tell my Christian folks, you know, that we must not think because Hindus are not Christians and Muslims are not Christians, that you would not be saved. You know, that is something, some of the Mount Everest theological challenges we have to face. I have met phenomenal Hindus and Muslims who do even better than some of us Christians at times. So that we have to have a broad worldview if we have to talk about anchoring sustainable development. We mustn't see the person, the other race, and you know, the other culture as the enemy or as the rival. We must see the need to, you know, collaborate and form linkages. Brother Narayan is on a group that Leela Ramdeen, who's a Catholic, is involved in. And I am part of that group also. And we are having a phenomenal time trying to craft, you know, solutions to problems like crime and violence that, you know, afflict us. I just want to read a Bible text, if you would not mind, on the Good Samaritan, because I am portraying and presenting the Good Samaritan as an effective model. Now, the two religious leaders, the priest and the Levite, saw this wounded man left for half dead, and they passed him. But a certain Samaritan, the Samaritan was despised in terms of religious groups, despised, all right? As he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn and took care of him. In a plural society, I'm suggesting that the development of cross-border relationships, you know, interfaith, inter-ethnic, you know, possibilities and synergies must be important if we have to anchor sustainable development. If we have to ask the Catholic young person to love the Hindu young person, the Hindu young person loving the Pentecostal young person, and the Pentecostal young person loving the Islamic young person. And we have to be role models in religion. I think sometimes we have been our worst enemies as religious leaders. Sometimes we sound as racist as the rest and as divisive. And that has hurt us tremendously. I want to say that I want to suggest that religion, to be relevant to anchoring sustainable development, we have to deal with the issue of cross-cultural institutions. Like for rehabilitation centers, I am privileged to run one in Matura. We have to have that. And then we have to have interfaith support groups, which are mechanisms to provide hope. All the physiologists today suggest that hope, all right, which is what religion we're supposed to provide more than any other profession. It is hope that, you know, has a positive impact upon our immune system. And now we're talking about psychoneuroimmunology, the impact of positive thinking. And I think all the religions, from Hindus, Muslims, Baha'i, Christians, you know, focus a lot on that. We have to focus a lot on that. In terms of some of the major issues that we are facing right now, but Yeats, in his second coming poetry, it was, you know, created in 1919 of January, spoke about, you know, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Neonarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood dim tide is loose, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. In my last 4 minutes, I want to say that we have to revive that ceremony of innocence, that ability to love each other, you know, unconditionally. And I do not treat you as you have treated me, but I treat you as I would want you to treat me. And that value of unconditional love, the compassion and nobility, the courage is what is important. In terms of crime and violence, I had a very heavy experience last year and I continue to have experience because 2 of our young people were shot and killed in Maruga. And they were shot and killed by a career assassin. I am not alleging that. I am saying that they were shot and killed by a career assassin who's protected by certain law enforcement officers. And I say that without fear of contradiction. All right. Into that case, I knew the girl who was shot and killed, Aruna, as a child growing up in the church singing with awesome talent. Her life took a wrong turn, got involved in some level of criminality. And therefore, my support group, Courage Unlimited, please, we were invited to intervene in that case. She was shot and left permanently paralyzed in the month of March 2022, young East Indian girl. And in the month of July, she and her husband were shot and killed, leaving behind an orphan just 8 years old. All right, he has since been relocated to another part of the world. You know, Mandela says that courage is not the absence of fear, but it's the management of fear. And I am suggesting that that is what we need in our society right now if we have to anchor sustainable development. With the level of crime and violence we have in this society, with what took place last year with the record-breaking number of murders, we just cannot develop. We're going to have a brain drain. We're already having a brain drain. There's a lot of discouragement and depression and suicide among some of our young people in the region. And therefore, we as religious leaders, you know, and talking about our involvement in sustainable development, we must be role models of courage and compassion, you know, and nobility. We must see the other side as a blessing, you know, try to use the talents of everyone. And that is why we need constitution reform, not only constitution reform, but campaign finance reform. We cannot have political parties accepting money, you know, from drug lords and the godfathers of the drug trade, and yet wanting to be role models in the society. And we have got to speak truth to power. So these 2 young people were killed, and I am seeking to be like Christ and Gandhi and display courage because the killer is around. In fact, the killer and his gang in South Trinidad recently robbed the family of the 2 victims. So he shot and killed 2 victims, and the girl was on a wheelchair. He left on a wheelchair in the month of March when he shot at the right side of her head and left her permanently paralyzed on the left side. So I am saying that therefore, as we look at the nexus between the drug trade and the gun trade, the lack of integrity in the political domain, the issue of career assassins protected by law enforcement officers, I am saying there's a role for religion to play. You know, we must have the courage, we must have the decency, we must have be the role models of integrity. We must involve in your young people in support groups where they reach out to each other, where they feel happy and recognize what Viktor Frankl says, that the happiest people in the world are those who are involved in making others happy. I'm suggesting that, you know, as we continue the search for relevance and truth, that we should negotiate and have a linkage with all religious groups, the Christian with the Hindu and the Muslim, etc. And I'm saying we must have institutions that are cross-cultural in nature and have support groups that will, you know, incarnate hope for the rest of the population. May God bless you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Pastor Clive, for that insightful presentation. And I take from it your words collaboration and courage as a major part of what you have shared with us this morning. I move on now to the next panelist, Dr. Nasser Mustapha, a senior lecturer, Department of Behavioral Studies in UWI, and Chief Examiner, Cape Sociology. He developed the MSc in Child and Youth Studies and is currently teaching Families, Systems and Dynamics and Caribbean Social Issues. I note that it was said recently retired, but it should also be noted that Dr. Mustapha has a wide extent of publications on the issue that he is that he has single-handedly brought a lot of the issues related to family, youth, and religion to bear through publications related on Islam in the Caribbean, religion and the linguistics in Trinidad and Tobago. And so I welcome Dr. Mustapha to make his presentation focusing on the Islamic perspective of today's topic, anchoring sustainable development through religion and spirituality. Dr. Mustapha.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Chairperson, SALISES officials, Dr. St. Bernard, fellow panelists, I'm very, very happy to be here to join in this discussion on sustainability and the role of religion, more specifically Islam, on sustainability. Now, to talk about sustainability is to talk about the future, or to think about the future. And I begin by looking at the Islamic position that everything in the universe, everything in the heavens and the earth were created by God Almighty to fulfill a particular purpose. So everything was created with a purpose. Everything is interdependent. And the human being, man, has been put in charge of managing the affairs of the universe. The affairs of the world was put in the hands of human beings. And we are told in the Quran, we have honored, indeed, we have honored the progeny of Adam and transported them across land and sea and provided them with good things for their sustenance and exalted them above many of our creatures. Now, I'm saying that because we have to appreciate that the human being that we're talking about, involved in crime and drugs, they were all aware of the view that they were God's creation. They are God's creation. And because of their society, they have deviated from the path that they are supposed to be following. So therefore, all the issues that arise among human beings in terms of crime and drugs and so on is something that we need to arrest. But I would like to focus specifically on God's creation. Now, we are told that human beings should ponder and reflect. And there is still hope, ladies and gentlemen, there is still hope for human beings to create a world that is better for all. Now, religion, we have to bring the whole concept of God back into religion. Religion should not be only ritualistic. It should help, ladies and gentlemen, to improve and to uplift people's existence. So going back to the Quran, and there are over 500 verses of the Quran that speak about the environment, that speak about the beauty in God's creation, starting with the large animals and small animals like insects and bees and so on. They all fulfill a role in the universe. Okay, so so we are urged to ponder and reflect, and also to appreciate the purpose that everything serves in the scheme of things, in the ecosystem. And the opposite of that, do not destroy. And this is where, when we look at environmental issues, when we look at simple things like bushfires that we meet every day in this time of the year, trees and so on, pollution of the waterways, when we look at the rivers and streams and the oceans, that they are all preventable human actions that have a consequence on the lives of other people now and in the future. So to talk about sustainability, we have to look beyond our own immediate needs, and we have to focus on other people. And this is what religion is supposed to introduce in people, a conscience, to think about the lives of other people and how all of our actions affect the lives of other people. And then, people will become more conscientious citizens in terms of the treatment of what God has entrusted on them. So we said that man is in charge, the human being is in charge of the world, entrusted to him, and very importantly, we have benefits for good treatment of the environment, and we have consequences for poor treatment. And the religion of Islam links the treatment of the environment to our religion. We are accountable, and this is a very important part of all the religions that are presenting today: accountability to a higher being, accountability to a supreme being, and also reward for doing good. So there are immediate rewards for doing good, and there are long-term rewards for ourselves and for other people. So we have to think about now about other people's welfare, and we have to think about the future. Our own offspring, our own descendants will be affected by our negative consequences. And you all in Trinidad and Tobago will know, the consequences of human behavior. We have the beaches, we have oil spills, we have the mountains, right, and erosion. We have the coral reefs. They are not the same as they used to be 40 and 50 years ago. We have the destruction of the forests. And we have so many of our, in terms of our species that are becoming extinct, and so much of land today has become unproductive. And there are so many chemicals that some of the waterways, are affected in terms of species of fishes and so on. So we have to avoid, how we treat the environment and how we treat God's resources, to avoid contamination and to avoid cutting down trees, burning fuels, and so on. Now, we hear a lot about climate change, and we see all over the world climate change, global warming, and so on, and we hear about the use of fossil fuels and so on. So my view is that climate change is the cumulative effect of the actions of people over a long period of time. And previous generations were not aware, and they abuse resources, and we know that due to poverty and landlessness and so on, people have abused the environment, right? But they have destroyed the ecosystem. So we have to have laws to protect the environment, to protect plants and trees, and to realize that there is punishment in this world and the hereafter for poor treatment or ill treatment of animals and all of God's creation. So God's creation is here to fulfill the needs of human beings, but a human being who worships God is a conscientious citizen who is able to appreciate that our actions could have negative effects on other people. So, and when we look, to focus on some of the problems that the world is facing now, on Trinidad and Tobago in particular, well, the Caribbean generally, we see a lot of poverty that has been exacerbated by, unemployment due to COVID-19 and so on. We see a lot of homelessness all over the world, including here. We still have people with no running water. It's not that a lot is wasted, right? We still have hungry people here. And we have to, those of us who are better off, have to consider ourselves fortunate. And therefore, I make an appeal for religious groups to have an institutionalized system for the redistribution of wealth. Because we have very wealthy people all over the world, but right here in Trinidad and Tobago, people boast that we have so much, but the poor have rights, and the poor are entitled to share in the country's wealth, which God has provided for all. So, and God has provided the resources, the land, and everything for all. And therefore, ill treatment or poor treatment of the environment is something that impacts on people. And therefore, we have to, one, be thankful the better among us should not waste, and we have a lot of wastage taking place and pollution taking place. So I'm appealing for us to think about, you know, the hereafter, to think about our treatment of resources, and to think about future generations. Now that is important. I mean, we may or may not have our own children, but think about future generations. And therefore, we want to produce a citizen, a well-rounded citizen, who even if he or she does not belong formally to a particular religion, supposed to have a social conscience, and a conscience that tells you that, you know, harming God's earth is a sin. It is a sin. And also we have to think about the destruction that we cause to the resources, how other people will be affected, and we ourselves in the long term will be affected. So we're looking at improving Trinidad and Tobago. Is a beautiful place with a lot of resources, and it needs to be protected, and we need to recognize those that are less fortunate, because our society, we tend to place a lot of emphasis on the successful ones, economically successful ones. We tend to place a lot of emphasis on academic excellence and so on, but we have to look at the downtrodden and the less fortunate members of our society, and people who eventually, now we recognize them, all the criminals and everybody in prison, we recognize them as God's creation that have gone astray due to lack of guidance and so on, lack of probably a good home environment, a good community and so on. So we have to really rescue people. Religion is about rescuing people, bringing about reform, bringing about social change, bringing about a redistribution of wealth, and making everyone happy. Not some very happy and many unhappy. This is what we have right now, that we have a lot of people who don't care because, you know, of the sort of struggles that they are facing. They feel that they have been unjustly treated by the society, right? So I'm making an appeal for us to appreciate this. People who have been wronged, and you know, people who can be rescued. As long as there's life, there's hope. And I'm urging my fellow religious leaders to play their part. Thank you very much. All the best. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mustapha, for your presentation. And I take note that you put out, you talk so much in detail about the environmental perspective, and you put out the challenge of institutionalizing systems to redistribute wealth as a part of the mandate of religious organizations and denominations. So thank you so much for your presentation. Now we move on to a video presentation by the Most Reverend Charles Jason Gordon. Archbishop Jason, as he is referred to, entered the Living Water community, a lay ecclesial community in Trinidad and Tobago in 1981. Since then, he has pursued many different levels of education, including his theology degree at the seminary in Trinidad and Tobago here, the St. John Vianney and Ugandan Martyrs Seminary. He is also a graduate of the University of Leuven with both his degrees in philosophy and theology. And he has also completed his PhD at the Jesuit College of the University of London. A parish priest at the parish of St. Martin de Porres and Gonzales. He founded a program called Community Intervention Transforming Youth. And this program was specifically used to target young persons within the area and help them to restructure and review and create a vision for their lives. He is a former lecturer in Caribbean history, social ethics, media, Caribbean theology at the Seminary of the Ugandan Martyrs. And he's currently the principal of the Caribbean School of Catholic Communications. In September of 2011, he was ordained Bishop of Bridgetown and was installed in the Diocese of Bridgetown, Barbados. while in Barbados, became a member of the Judicial Reform and Institutional Strengthening Project, whose mandate was to speed up justice in the courts of Barbados. In the Diocese of Bridgetown, he founded the Hub People Group, a unit within the Diocese of Barbados to assist people in achieving sustainable livelihoods. Thereafter, he was appointed Archbishop of Port of Spain in 2017 and installed here. He subsequently became the Vice President of the Antilles Episcopal Conference and is the chair of the conference's Evangelization Commission. He has been known for implementing various types of development strategies, including a change strategy to transform 10 of the underperforming schools located in different parts of Trinidad and Tobago, with the focus of them attaining of the children in the schools attaining academic excellence. He has published a number of books, the latest of which is called Transforming the Caribbean Family and Society, the Power of the Domestic Church. And so I want to hand over to the technicians so that they can play his video presentation for us this morning.
Anchoring sustainable development through spirituality, religion, and morality in Caribbean small island development states. What a wonderful topic. I want to start with the foundations, and I would say that the Abrahamic religions share a very common belief that God is eternal, that God is one, and that God existed before time, before matter, and before space. And therefore, we understand the relationship between the creation, ourselves, each other, and God out of this perspective. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, however, we see the Creator as much more personally involved in the process of creating. And in a very specific way, it shapes all of our relationships. We were created in the image and likeness of God. This means that the human, male and female, are different from other species. But also, we have the imprint of the divine in us, on us. And therefore, every human person has a dignity that really has to be respected. We have to understand that from that, what we see is together, male and female, we are the image and likeness of God. Together. That's the complementarity of the male and female, not above or below, but side by side. In the creation, when God said it is not good for man to be alone, that's Genesis 2:18. We were created for relationships with one another and with God. We are relational beings. That's who we are. And that's the foundation for every development thinking. It has to start with who we are and what allows for human flourishing. And we flourish in relationships. In the act of creation, the soul was breathed into us, Genesis 2:7. And this means that we are not just matter, a body. We are matter, body, and soul. We have a capacity for communion with all creation, with each other, and ultimately with the transcendent, with God. These three principles have significant implications for all of us. And in the Catholic tradition, we distill them into the principles of Catholic social teaching. I'll just give you a few of those. The first is the dignity of the human person. We know where that comes from. Respect for human life. We know where that comes from. The right of association, that human beings can come together and work together in an association. The fourth principle is participation. We have a duty and a right to participate in civic life. A preferential option for the poor. Solidarity, that we come together as a family to work for the good of each other. Stewardship, we must take care of each other and the creation. The principle of subsidiarity, that a higher body must not do for a lower body what that lower body can do for itself. And the human equality and the common good. The common good is an interesting one, that our decision making is not about what's good for me personally, but it's always about what's good for us collectively. It might be good for me personally to hoard all the wealth of the nation and leave other people to live in squalor. Well, that would not be good. That will not be the common good. The common good asks, what is good for the whole, not just for the individual or for the group? When we see these principles and we look at the 17 millennial goals, development goals, we have to realize a lot of the development goals are underpinned by the principles of Catholic social teaching, by the biblical principles that we were created equal. That's why no poverty. Every one of us deserves to live and flourish. The goods of the earth, another principle of the Catholic social teaching, the goods of the earth have a universal destination, that all people must participate in them. Put another way by Pope John Paul II, all private property has a social mortgage. Insofar as there's one poor person, you have no absolute right to your private property. Zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy. And now we're going into what we need for societies to flourish here. Decent work and economic growth, industrial and innovation and infrastructure, reduction of inequality, sustainable cities and communities. These are the things that we human beings need. And what the development goals are saying is that insofar as we are not giving the infrastructure and giving what is required for human flourishing, we're not reaching to our ultimate goal. And from that perspective, I would say that the development goals are amazing and they take humanity very far. But we have to also see that these goals have come from the Judeo-Christian tradition and how we've understood the human being. I want to say the second point or area that I wanted to look at in terms of what Christian tradition or what spirituality and religion contribute. And I would say it is in the whole concept of sustainable development. And this is a model of development. For the Catholic tradition, all development must serve not only a person, but all of us, each of us, and every dimension of us. And so we have a whole philosophy on development. And it comes from Pope Paul VI, which really talks about the development of each person, every dimension of the human person. And by dimension of the human person, I'm talking about body, mind, soul. Body, mind, and soul as three dimensions of the human person. And then heart, which is our emotional self. Body, mind, soul, and heart. Those are we know about emotional intelligence now. The normal developmental model that I see in the Caribbean is what I would call the glass and steel model, and where money is first, economic growth is first, and everything else has to serve that. But that's putting the cart before the horse, because when you go to that model of development, what has happened all too often is the big prestigious projects which the country can't afford. You borrow for it, you end up in debt. Corruption is now rife because everyone wants to get their hands on the pie or the piece of the pie that they can get into. And what ultimately happens is the collapse of the economy. Barbados, one of the former prime ministers, said that we will be first world by and gave a date. And what happened after that? Barbados became the second or third most indebted nation in the world. You know, Peter Minshall gives a wonderful story of man crab and washerwoman. And this was back in 1986, where man crab, which is technology and all that it does, killed and polluted the river. And corrupted the devotees of washerwoman. and then killed washerwoman so that he could get the soul and the obedience of the people to corrupt them to make money. That is a model that I see most often. And Peter Minshall in his trilogy in the 1980s named it really, really well. When the Catholic Church talks about integral human development, what we're saying is development must not be after the money. It has to be about the development of each person. Why is this so important? Well, recently I was in a school and Standard 5, ready to sit the SCA exam. And teachers are saying to me that 10 of the class of 80 can't read properly. Now, we are accustomed to teaching the curriculum. We have to learn now to teach children. If a child can't read properly in Standard 2, that must be addressed. We need to shift the development model to ensure that each person achieves their fullest capacity in every dimension, and that we do it for all people. So we can't say we have bright people and who do well in scholarships and so on when we have a high percentage of our people still not able to read and write. We have to do it for all of our people. There's a different model of development. The other one that I think important, more modern, which Pope Francis brought, is this whole understanding of integral ecology. Modernity has flourished through a binary system, 0 or 1. And this binary model, which is modernity, allows science to flourish. And we've done many amazing innovations because of this model. And we take it for granted. The problem is that we are not binary. We are interconnected in everything and with everything in the creation. And until we understand that, what we lack is we take a mechanistic man-crab view of creation, and we think that we should just be exploiting it. When Pope Francis called the earth our common home, he really nailed it and nailed it. And the point is we are in this interconnected web. We're living in this web of all things. And we have developed the thinking that our relationship with the creation is one of domination. It's not. That's a very bad interpretation of scriptures. In Genesis, Adam was asked, Genesis 2:15, to till and to keep. That's husbandry, understanding the dynamic relationship of the planting and the sowing and the reaping on the one hand, to keep, which is to guard and to be a steward over and to ensure the flourishing of all parts of the creation. This was a priestly task that Adam was given. And in the garden, as high priest, he sacrificed. He made sacrifice every day. And the garden, the human, in this unique relationship with the divine, was reverence. And that's what worship is. This giving of ourselves in right relationship to God and to each other and to the creation. And for that, Adam and God and Eve, the garden was a meeting place. By losing our religious and spiritual foundations, we now manipulate the garden, man-crab, and the oceans, and the rivers, and the hills. And from the priestly task of ensuring right relationship, we have fallen into manipulating. And therefore, we have reached now where the latest thing I have seen is that we have reached a stage of great shock for climate. And we're in a climate emergency. And we in the Caribbean are the second most vulnerable peoples in the world if this thing goes as bad as it can go. Pope Francis takes his inspiration from a 13th century saint, Francis of Assisi, who gives us two very powerful things. Brother, sun, and sister moon. And back in the 13th century, he understood the interconnectedness of all things, that we are brother and sister to all creation and to each other. And the second thing that he gave us was fraternity. When he, in the midst of the Crusades, he went into the Crusades to speak with the Sultan. And he and the Sultan had this amazing conversation and recognized that they were brothers. Pope Francis writes two very important documents. The first is on the creation, Laudato Si, praise to you, O God. And the second is fratelli tutti, brothers and sisters all. This is what religion brings. At its very best, it brings this recognition that we are called to live in communion with all people. And we have to move past our differences and be able to engage each other as brothers and as sisters. Thank you so much.
We want to thank His Grace, even in his absence, for his presentation, a very thoughtful presentation that spotlighted a lot of the Catholic tradition as it relates to the movement of justice and so on. And I note that he talked about the difference between right relationship and manipulation. As we move on, I would now like to invite Ravindra Maharaj, affectionately known to some as Raviji, to make his presentation on the Hindu perspective. He is a community worker, cultural innovator, and a founder. Known simply as Raviji, he has become well known as a Hindu activist, a journalist as well, a poet, an amateur photographer, social and cultural worker, and educator. He's also been called to serve at the national level in different ways, the latest being an appointment by the cabinet as a member of the Board of Governors at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, where he also served as chairman of the Advisory Council to the Academy of Arts, Letters, Culture, and Public Affairs at the UGT. He has been serving as a voluntary worker since 1983. During his early years of community service, he gathered around him a small group of workers dedicated to his vision of a healthy Hindu community in a healthy Trinidad and Tobago. Together with them, he founded the Hindu Parcha Kendra, and in 2009, he handed over the organization to those he trained. He has also served in Guyana. Raviji currently leads the Heritage Vacation course at the HPK. The project, which was started in 2004, is geared towards growing an aware community with resident skills in the community, organizing through working with children. The project has already developed members who are currently organizers of the HVC project and other community events. The project is delivering many other new and exciting projects and is preparing the succession line of the organization. Raviji is also the interim chairman of Astral, the Association of Traditional Religions. This organization serves to encourage dialogue and fraternity between traditional religions of Trinidad and Tobago, particularly the Orisa and the Hindu. So I turn over now to Raviji.
Namaskar to everybody. I'll go right into my presentation. All niceties have been completed by the chairperson. At the beginning, I congratulate everybody for putting forward such important issues that we have to be concerned with, and all are very, very relevant. In that context, my issue is, where do we start? I'm coming from a traditional and indigenous religion, usually called pagans, and our worldview have a common basis, but everything is potentially divine. With that in mind, one has to consider whether one is in a religion, one is also a religion. What is man's dharma, the right thing to do for the welfare of all? Atmano mokshartham jagat hitayacha, for my own personal moksha, liberation, satisfaction, and for the welfare of all. So the first thing I'd like to suggest is that, well, however we look at the principles that you evoked in the subject that we are supposed to discuss, and with the context of anchor sustenance in development of people, one would naturally see that one has to be conscious of the earth on which we stand, all people stand. The second thing we will naturally see is that man, it has to be done by man, human being, with the aid of morals, as you ask, with the aid of religion, as you ask, with the aid of spirituality, as you ask in the proposition that you have given us. So in that context, I asked, then where do we start? And I will therefore try to outline a socio-psychological dimension, trajectory, the making of the mind. Because if we make the mind, we make demand. And we make demand, we make the world. Why I said that? I remember hearing a story once, where in a classroom, a teacher gave the class a map of the world to fix. And the children tried to, he had cut it in pieces to make it as a puzzle. And the children tried to fix it, but they couldn't fix it. And then when the teacher had to show them how to do it, he said, now turn over all of the things. And there's the other side is the map of a man. If you fix the man, you'll fix the map. If you fix the man, you'll fix the world. So that is the premise under which I will try to map out how the Hindu approaches this idea, and to look at some concepts and customs and actualities, and of course the spirituality of our religion, and morals. As a child, I remember being taught to, as soon as I get up, often for the cloud from my Aji, the first bow to the earth before I step on the earth. Now, we only used to sleep on pal, but we roll off the pal and we are on the earth already. But that notwithstanding, that principle of that and that cloud give me a sanskar that however, whenever, wherever I get up first in the morning, it's a bow to the earth. And therefore, through that, everything on earth. When I went to Bharat, I learned a mantra that corresponds to that certain issue. And it is what I now could bow and repeat, because we had lost so much of our religious things, text and language. It's only when I went to Bharat, I learned the mantra. Samudra Vasane Devi, Parvatastana Mandale, Vishnu Patni Namastubhyam, Padas Parasham Shamasumya. O Mother Earth, who is clothed with the saris of all the ocean, and the mountains are your breast. Vishnu Patni, you are the Patni. Patni means like husband and wife. You are the Patni of Bhagwan Vishnu, the eternal, the universal divinity that creates and rules the entire cosmos and everything and more. You are the Patni. And there is a famous imagery that we look at very often to understand that concept. And Bhagwan Vishnu is on the ocean and lying on the ocean, and Lakshmi, his consort, Dharti Mata, because Lakshmi is Dharti Mata and also Sita, pressing his feet, demonstrating that all on the earth itself has one function, to press the feet of Bhagwan Vishnu. In other words, to pay obeisance to all of the earth. Everything of the earth has that corresponding responsibility and connection with the divine to serve the divine, the cosmos. So, and when the Bhagavad Puran further demonstrates that issue in the creation theology. Adhidhaivam athadhyatma adhibhutam iti prabhu yathaikam paurusham viryam tridha vidyata tachrinu. that the Purusha, the Narayan, Vishnu, who was alone, proceeded to make himself into three by the power of his own Maya. He didn't have to look out for something outside from material. By the power of his own Maya, Maya Shakti, the power of his own Maya Shakti, he divided himself into three. Adi Daivam, which is the plane of these deities. Adhyatma, the spirit that is everly present in everything. Adi Bhutam, the sansar, this material cosmos. The spirit is in everything, is a basic principle in all pagan religions. And in the Upanishad, it's called Isha Avasyam Vidam Sarvam Yat Kincha Jagatyam Jagat Tena Tyaktena Bhundhitaha Magradakasitharam, which is very instructive. Isha Avasyam Vidam Sarvam, that Isha, that Vishnu, exists in everything. Isha Avasyam Vidam Sarvam, everything. Yat Kincha Jagatyam Jagat, whatever exists on this cosmos and this plane. Tena Tyaktena Bhundhita, Bhundhita, enjoy everything. How? With a sense of renunciation. Not all is mine, like the Bajan and Spiral Scarab said, all is mine. With renunciation, enjoy, means enjoy, work, save, use, and share. That share is called Dan. And usually at all our ritual times especially, that dana concept of giving is a ritual dan, sharing to the poor, sharing to the needy, sharing for children for education, sharing for the sick, sharing to help for contributing to make hospitals and schools. That dan is constituted like that. So the Purusha, that therefore concept of, I will use the Christian theology, which you're more familiar to, the word God, but our concept in God is very different. And because God for us, that Ishwar for us, resides in everything here on earth and everywhere else. So the Bhagavad Puran, therefore, demonstrates this sacredness of this dharti. And human being are also on this dharti. So the relationship between the dharti, the earth, Mother Earth, and the human being has to be understood in this context from all religious traditions. So, therefore, man, therefore, the earth is for the sustenance of man, animal, and everything that existed, including the atmosphere, the stratosphere, and everything else. It is that then, therefore, that context, and it is from there that the rishis who have, who see the darshan, they, the sages, have brought out mantras and literature for us to understand how we must live. Now, how we must live? That concept is evolving out of a concept called dharma. That dharma is that which, a principle which must hold everything in their own ways. And therefore, the one being on existence that has an intellectual, moral, and conscious responsibility for that is a human being. And all other aspects of the creation that they also play an equal role. For example, the carbon that is threatening daily, the sun shines, the earth, the trees do photosynthesis, and it deals with the carbon dioxide. So the tree plays a role, and the tree plays a role, and at the same time bears fruit. There is an interesting song that is demonstrated the principle here. Nadiya na piye kabhi apna jal, vriksha na khaye kabhi apna phal. That the river never drinks its own water and the tree never eats its own fruit. That is a sign of how man has to live. That whatever you work for, you also have to work for the other. It is not selfish. And that working for the other is the principle which makes life spiritual, because it moves from the ego, it moves from the individual, and it goes to the we and everything. So that yajna, that is all, that action, that activity is called a yajna. That in the Bhagavad Gita is put well, Loka Sangrahame Vapi Sampashyan Kartum Arhasi. With an intention to the maintenance of the world, you should take the action. Life, therefore, has to be an ongoing action for the maintenance of the world. And I appreciate Brother Mustapha Bhai Sahib when he talked about, if you worship, you have to be a good citizen. Because for us, citizenship is just a limited word. But membership of the entire cosmos is where the idea of one's role play with Atma Moksharatam Jagat Hidayata for the welfare of my own self and the whole existence. So Dharma is rooted in that concept. This is why our tradition is called Sanatan Dharma, the eternal way of life that corresponds with unselfish life, given life. And the highest person of renunciation, they call them sannyasis, who are totally dedicated, take the least for themselves and give to others. Interesting, the word dharma, dharti, comes from that same word. Dharma, dharti, which is earth, or dharani, which is earth. All that words. So the idea of dharti and the idea of dharma and the idea of creatures of dharti also have that kind of a basic common thing. This entire world, therefore, is called sansar because everything is circuitous. It is always a completely circle. And long time, when I'll pick out something from our very life, long time I remember when people would have to get their children married. We didn't have love marriage in those days. Parents would ask the now to go out and look for a child, a man or a woman with good sanskar. So I'm coming to a point now that I'm going to begin how to start. Sanskar is a very important thing. So sanskar, what does it mean? Sanskar is a worldview where where the child from pregnancy, from that moment, there are several stations, several places of development that are marked out by our Shastras, and there are ceremonies that function to be able to influence the growth of the child's mind becoming. Now, to do that from a point of view of the Shastra, it will take some time. So I'll use a scientific finding recently when I read some papers from Harvard University, and this new cutting edge discussion on brain architecture. Brain architecture, they say, in the first about 5 years after postnatal, then the entire human conduct is created. So that means an adult's human conduct is idealism or her idealism, the way of seeing the world and with the responsibility for the world and the family and the community and everything. That is secured in the earliest years of the child up to about 5 years. And therefore, we want to create, therefore, a world of people who will be responsible for all the things that we were talking about as necessary to do, all the great ideas and ideals. Then that has to begin at the beginning of the child. And the child, usually, things are changing now, in the home. And I would just want to remind you how dramatically this is portrayed to us, because every child in the world has a common mantra that the child has, no matter what language, no matter what religion. And that is a nursery rhyme. If you sing that and along with me, rock-a-bye baby on the treetop, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall, and down will come baby, cradle and all. So the cradle of the civilization is the home and is the fun baby. The journey has to start there. And just one more point, that I call on the government of Trinidad and Tobago to consider this option and make acts and all of that to secure women and mothers, in fact, and the home, to create the kind of environment that will make the brain architecture or the sanskar possible to create the kind of citizens for the world. Jai Shri Ram. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Raviji. And this just proves our point that there is so much more that we have to hear and listen to and have dialogue on. And so, as Dr. St. Bernard would have mentioned, there will be another session on this topic in the month of May. Thank you so much for your presentation. I want to move on now to Ms. Eintou Springer to make her presentation. Ms. Springer is an elder of the Orisa community, a poet, playwright, librarian, and cultural activist. And she was honored as Poet Laureate of Port of Spain from 2002 to 2009. Springer's work frequently deals with social issues as well as pride in her African heritage. In 2003, she retired as director of the National Heritage Library of Trinidad and Tobago, having founded the library and been its director since October 1993. She has served as a founding member of various cultural organizations, including the Writers' Union of Trinidad and Tobago, the National Drama Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Caribbean Theatre Guild. As an acclaimed performer and actress, she's received the NDATT's 2004 Vanguard Award, and through her family company, the Decay Group, she explores social issues using traditional performance forms. She is the author of several books, including poetry collections for both adults and children, as well as having her writings published in a range of publications and anthology, including Sturdy Black Bridges, Visions of Women in Literature, Daughters of Africa, and Moving Beyond Boundaries, Volume 1, International Dimensions of Black Women's Writing. Her play, How Nancy Brings the Drums, celebrated the United Nations International Year of People of African Descent, and she was a part of the UNESCO's Youth Theatre Initiative, her play that is. Springer is the subject of a 2010 film directed and produced by Anon Sakan entitled Ida's Daughter, The World of Eintou Springer. Good morning, Ms. Springer.
Good morning, and greetings to everyone. I want to begin by saying, Ekaro, good morning in Yoruba, but also I want to say, bonjour tout le monde, as I reach out to our brothers and sisters in Haiti through the language that they speak. I want to say that they are still paying the price for their spirituality, voodoo being the source of their liberation. And as someone who practices African spirituality, the Orisa spirituality, I always reach out to them. And what of me? What of my own story of finding self? Sleep fled from me, giving me no escape from the fear gnawing at my insides. The voices in my head said, flee, flee from this place. Can't you feel the devil salivating in anticipation of seizing your very soul? Who is this Ogun? Twin cutlasses of rage, this Orimala, this Eshu, this Shungo, those female joblesses, Oshun, Yemunja, Oya, Mama Ile. Didn't the whip beat that out of you? Didn't holy baptism redeem you? Pray, pray for the dawn, for no peace will come to you. Flee from this place, save your immortal soul. Why am I spending time reading that extract from one of my poems that speaks to my initiation into the Orisa belief system in a forum that focuses on sustainable development in small island states through religion and spirituality? The UN has identified 17 goals for sustainable development in small island states. I have chosen to deal with just one of the 17 that I feel most relevant to the contribution of Orisa spirituality to sustainable development through spirituality, religion, morality. Goal number 10 seeks to, and I quote, reduce inequalities amongst countries and communities. To my mind, that lies at the very core of the question of sustainability and spirituality. Indeed, it can be a point of departure for many of the other goals. For example, quality education, sustainable cities and communities, and concerns about climate change. There's a great difference between equality and equity. Removing inequality does not guarantee equity. I am free to practice my spirituality, but is there equity in how this belief system is treated? Additionally, how does the inequity with which my belief system is treated hamper its ability to contribute meaningfully to sustainable development of both the human being and society at large? In my country, and I dare say in the region, Orisa spirituality has been the womb which has gestated and brought to recognition and visibility the popular art forms of calypso, carnival characters, and Sylvan, more now interestingly big in the national conversation. Suddenly, as if artists, plant people, and cultural activists have not been saying the same thing for donkey years. The pan, nurtured in the early days in the Orisa yards of Laventille and Tacarigua. I am free to practice my spirituality, yes, since 2000, when the legal prohibitions were lifted. But despite that ability, nothing has been done by the state institutions in the society to lift the stigma to which we have signed on to these UN goals. So as an educated, knowledgeable citizen about to be initiated, I could experience the feelings expressed in the poem. I cannot assume that there is an awareness here of Orisa spirituality in Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, we are omitted from most fora, and I have to thank my Hindu brother, Ravindra, who just presented, for my presence here this day at this forum, and I thank the organizers for including me. Selwyn Ryan, former head of ISCR, in his book Behind the Bridge, 1977, documents the coming of thousands of Yoruba people as indentured laborers between 1807 and 1841. They brought their spirituality, their masking traditions, their economic institutions like Susu to the East Port of Spain, Mova, Laventille area. But after all this time and such invaluable contributions, Ifa Orisa devotees are not automatically represented at forums like these. In a paper in the Caribbean Quarterly in 1999, Aegina and Gibbons document the fact that there was no rebellion, no resistance during enslavement that was not rooted in African spirituality. In fact, the most hated word in our lexicon, obia, speaks to obia, O-B-I-A, the spirituality of the Akan people, the most warlike and rebellious of all enslaved. It is discussed that the laws against African spirituality in Trinidad and Tobago were only removed in 2000 by the Basdeo Panday administration. The fear and terror of the spirituality is deeply rooted. The lack of equity, allied to the experience of dehumanization of enslavement, has led to a serious identity crisis in the African. No attempt has been made to address this through the other UN goals, for example, quality education. The education system does not include a positive history of Africans, nor a knowledge of ancestral achievement. In fact, the wearing of the Ide on the wrist that signals initiation into our belief system is often challenged by the teachers. One still hears stories about black hair being regarded as unnatural in the workplace, schools, and beauty pageants. The malady of skin bleaching is very prevalent. The question of business is as critical of that of education. The percentage of Black-owned businesses is marginal. Business is necessary for growth and development communities, for wealth creation, and improving the living condition of citizens. Professor Selwyn Ryan in Sharks and Sardines speak to the deliberate hounding of Black business out of Port of Spain and environs. We must develop clear programs to invest in the creation of Black business so that the education system is not just about a piece of paper, but inculcating an entrepreneurial spirit and developing the humanity, the identity, the sense of self of all African youth. It is all linked. I fail to understand why administrators cannot see this identity crisis, this lack of opportunities for wealth creation, and lack of positive sense of one's history and respect for one's spirituality as a direct link to the criminality in communities where predominantly African resides. The idea of sustainable communities, another UN goal, really does not exist. Our youth have rejected the established institutions and in large numbers, the established religions and spirituality. How then can Ifa Orisa spirituality assist in achieving these UN goals? One of the principles on which our spirituality is built is Iwapele, good character. We enjoy to do what is right. We seek the blessings and favor of the Orisa and our ancestors. Next is respect and reverence for ancestors and elders. We ascribe divinity as well to the earth, the waters, the forests. This is critical for dealing with climate change. I recently did a workshop for schools where we were celebrating certain iconic female Calypsonians. In speaking of singing Sandra, I referred to her as mother and talked about the notion of mother as nurturing and made reference to Mother Earth. Some schools withdrew their children from the discussion, saying that Mother Earth, talking about Mother Earth, was against their Christian religious belief. No wonder we have pollution and the violation of nature, for which we are now paying the price. Ifa Orisa spirituality demands that we live life in harmony with nature are not in control of nature. And we live in harmony with the God that we call Olodumare. We pay a lot of attention to Ori, the inner self, the inner self. We self-analyze. We talk to our inner self and ask for guidance. One of my school friends, a scholar with a PhD, recently asked me if Orisha people believe in God. If Orisha devotees believe that we are called to serve our community, take care of our elders, and live a life of balance, we have our sacred texts, formerly oral, now written, 256 verses of Ifa, recognized by the UN since 2005 as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. It is time to embrace equity as distinct from equality and decolonize our spirituality and our cultural forms. Ogun, the Orisha of creativity, war, wealth, and metal, gave us the gift of the steel pan. Can you imagine the extent of our income earning potential if we did not have negativity towards everything African and had the foresight to patent the pan? As of today, as the UN decade for people of African descent is nearing an end, nothing has been done, not one state event in recognition of the decade. Our National Reparations Committee has been gutted. I truly envy the Barbadians as they engage on these issues on the world stage. George Lamin defines emancipation and says what it means in the context of development, sustainability, and the well-being of our communities. He says the word to emancipate means to take out of the hand. It says, I have you in my hand. I have you in my clutch. And to emancipate yourself means to take yourself out of that hand, out of that clutch. I reject my invisibility. I reject the invisibility of my spiritual belief system, a belief system that is over 6,000 years old, a belief system that gave me the strength to fight, to come out of enslavement. I testify to my humanity and to the relevance of that spirituality. Ashe.
Thank you so much for the challenge of the conversation you have posed to us and decolonizing our own spirituality and what that would mean in a practical way, particular from the Ifa Orisha community. Our last speaker is Ricardo Bharat Hernandez. Typically, most people in Trinidad know him as Chief Ricardo. And Chief Ricardo is here today as a representative of the First Peoples community within Trinidad and Tobago, specifically the Santa Rosa First Peoples community. He is a key figure responsible for the revival and resurgence of the First Peoples community and is considered a prime gatekeeper. He is also referred to as a culture broker and is responsible for networking with a wide range of institutions and agents, religious organizations, political parties, researchers, other cultural groups, and also networking with the organizations in the wider Caribbean, Central America, South America, and North America. Chief Ricardo serves on the Trinidad and Tobago National Committee on Reparations, and he advocates for Indigenous peoples, not only in Trinidad, but across the Caribbean. As the chair of the Caribbean Organization of Indigenous Peoples, he has the task of uniting Indigenous peoples of the region and has successfully advocated for a seat for the COIP on the CARICOM Regional Commission on Reparations. Since the discovery of the indigenous human remains at the Red House Parliament site, at the reburial of those remains, which took place in October 2019. Chief Ricardo is currently engaged in the establishment of a First Peoples Heritage Village on 25 acres of land returned to the First Peoples by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The village reflects his vision for sustaining the physical and cultural legacy of First Peoples of Kairi, known now as Trinidad and Tobago. Chief Ricardo served as a councillor with the Orisa Borough Corporation for a period of 18 years, 6 of which were in his capacity as deputy mayor. In 2017, the chief received a Distinguished Fellow Award, the equivalent of professor from the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, and thank you so very much for your very kind words of introduction. And let me thank the organizers of this very important event. And I would like my sister Pearl, to thank Brother Raviji for ensuring a space for us, First Peoples, in this forum. I want to begin by saying that except there isn't a serious attempt by government and established religious bodies to address the wrongs of the past to different sectors of the society, then our attempts of spirituality towards sustainable development will have little effect. And I will further explain what I mean. Let me start by sharing with you a little of the spirituality of our First Peoples. The center of spirituality is the Creator, the Great Spirit, called by diverse names according to the various indigenous cultures. This is the Godhead that encompasses male and female, the elements and nature. Indigenous spirituality comes from the heart and is nature-based. The cultural heritage of the First Peoples is based on a spiritual worldview that all animate and inanimate things on this and all other worlds have a common root and origin. Life is a continuous interplay of matter and spirit, and everything that has a spiritual dimension, which is the fundamental aspect of existence of all creatures. The planet Earth, or Mother Earth, is given to human beings to live and occupy as caretakers, with an eternal duty to protect and nurture its sacredness. Human beings are allowed to live and produce on Mother Earth only through sustainable means, and the indigenous worldview prohibits human beings from engaging in any activities which destroy Mother Earth. Today we see that that is not so in this modern world. So there we have the problems arising. The spirituality involves respect for everything that surrounds us, animals, plants, rivers, and seas, as we have heard in previous contributions. When one hurts or when one hunts or fishes, one not only seeks permission from the Creator, but also has to pay back the plants and the waters. In early days, we judged time, weather, conditions, and many things by the elements, the sun, the moon, and the stars, which guide us, the winds and the cool, refreshing rains. We live by the Great Spirit Tamushi's hand through nature. However, spirituality is not confined to seasons, but is lived daily, is practiced daily, a way of life. For example, for the building of our homes or canoes or any new adventure, special prayers are offered. Similarly, at the time of planting for a good crop and thanksgiving at the time of harvest. Or most of these traditions and values have gone from us. Hence, we are reaping today the rot of how we do things. The smoke ceremony, for example, is a channel of communication with the Great Spirit Tamushi, Adayali Watinachi. This tradition recognizes the Creator as a spirit no one has ever seen. The fire is regarded as one of the limbs or the manifestations of the Creator, in that we cannot exist without it. And at the same time, it can be very destructive force. The ascending smoke is offered in thanksgiving and petition to the Great Spirit. In the water ritual, we give thanks for the waters of the rivers, the springs, and the seas, and for the healing virtues and medicines. Indigenous medicine, which comes from the produce of the land and waters, does not contradict, but works hand in hand with conventional medicine, which is made from leaves, fruit seeds, roots, crops, vegetables, starches, and oils extracted from forest plants. The worldview held by many that man was given dominion over all has led man on a pathway of destruction. Dominion over all does not mean destructive activities and policies. The belief of the first peoples relative to this space given to mankind called Earth is a reminder that mankind shares Earth with all creatures and should live in harmony with nature. Here in Trinidad, we need to continue to engage in sustainable agriculture as planned for the First Peoples Heritage Village. In other areas, we are increasingly prone to flooding, and the Ministry of Agriculture's reforestation program must be applauded for addressing air and water quality. At the same time, it addresses land degradation and it replants trees. The program is effectively planning for the future. We need to learn lessons from the past and not be repeatedly exposed to destruction from recurring phenomena such as floods and hurricanes. For example, a hurricane will flatten a Caribbean country, erasing as many as 90% of all structures. So what do? They rebuild the same sort of structures that are vulnerable to destruction from hurricanes. Square or rectangular houses with jagged roofs. The best structure is the Amerindian or First Peoples one, with a conical, which is conical, and at the very worst is very easy to rebuild. But of course, if you bring these things to the modern generation, they will see it as old-fashioned, and they will not want to adhere to some of these traditions. So we have to pay the price for our destruction and what we see as going for this modern time. All right? So with these few words, I don't want to cross my time. I just shared a little about the spirituality, but I want to underline what the past speaker, such as Sister Pearl, had mentioned in her presentation. The first peoples were colonized and they were Christianized with the Catholic missionaries. And for a long period of time, over 200 years, we have been dominated by this tradition of the Catholic Church, which of most of our parents and even members of our community, they still follow and hold dear to their hearts. When we attempt now to come in open and practice our spirituality as seen by the indigenous peoples, we are labeled of dealing with spirits and practicing obia and things that are not Christian. So how do you go forward? We are saying that there must be a conversation. That is why I said there must be a conversation with organized religion, especially Christianity, in order to see how we can show that some of the early practices of Christianity, as outlined by His Grace the Archbishop in his presentation, was in conformity with indigenous spirituality. And today, the church, the Catholic Church, of which we are a part, has moved away from the early Catholic tradition and the spirituality, which in a way, to a certain extent, supported some of the indigenous traditions, has moved away clearly from that, and are now in a more modern age is trying to be on par with other Christian denominations, Some of our leaders in the church don't even want to hear or associate with us because they feel we are practicing something that is not Christian. For God's sake, how do you go forward? How do you live together? And I saw His Grace make reference to some of the writings of the Holy Father, Pope Francis. But I also see that Pope Francis made a pilgrimage to Canada and was part of the events of the first peoples there. And he blessed the water. At the same time, the indigenous peoples were singing their chants and giving praise to the water, meshing that indigenous spirituality with Christianity. And there are so many examples in the Bible, so many that we can point to that can show and link with indigenous spirituality. So that we find ourselves today in a sort of a confusion, in a sort of a still colonized form and depression. But when we practice, we are scoffed upon by some of the others who do not understand out of ignorance. So in order for us to go forward, we must have discussion. And I have called on the church at the highest level to have discussion. Let us see how we can go forward together, not separating ourselves, but more uniting ourselves with the understanding that spirituality goes beyond organized religion. With these few words, I wish to thank you so very much for the opportunity to share a little bit of the first people and the tradition of spirituality and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief, for your very powerful contribution. So over the course of the presentations, we've heard of decolonizing, the dignity of the human, approaches to the self in a more intimate relationship with nature. We've also heard of the struggles between the religious groupings of reconciling the role of the person, the role of the society, and the role of the government within sustainable development. So as we begin to take the first sets of questions, what we're going to do is we're going to take groups of questions and groups of speakers and allow some folks to respond to the questions that have already been posed. I know the participants so far have been very active in the chat, discussing many different things. And so for the order of those who would have presented their questions already, we have 3 questions, and I'd particularly like to ask Dr. Lazarus, probably Chief Pastor Dottin, and Ms. Springer, if they could give us a response on some of these questions. And other panelists, don't worry, I'm going to call on you as well, don't worry. But for the first round of questions, I want to share these questions, and if anybody is willing to respond. First question, is there an opportunity in terms of development of the individual and sustainable developments for communities, countries, and the region as a whole to explore moving from religion to responsibility? Very intriguing question there. So one more time. Is there an opportunity in terms of development of the individual and sustainable development of communities, countries, and the region as a whole to explore moving from religion to responsibility? Second question. How much religion is involved in Jamaica? So this was out of a conversation that was happening in the chat, right? And so the person was commenting that there's a lot of religion and a lot of Christian sects, I believe in particular in Jamaica. Do these churches contribute to the moral underpinning that sustainable development needs? Crime, meanwhile, is not subsiding in Jamaica, but then do those who face marginalization and exclusion attend the church? So this is a question about the role of the church in Jamaica, and how do those who feel marginalized and excluded, are they attending church? So that's the second question. And the third question for this round, religion in and of itself can be viewed as divisive in nature. We have now a more educated society with persons who are moving away from traditional religious paradigms and are now looking at the universe and being multi-theistic. How then do we incorporate these new concepts to aid in development discourse? So one more time, the last question. Religion in and of itself can be viewed as divisive in nature. we have now more educated society with persons who are moving away from the traditional religious paradigms and looking at the universe and being multi-theistic. How then do we incorporate these new concepts to aid in development discourse? Dr. Lazarus, I see your hand is up already. So we'll take some comments from the panel.
Hi, so I'll attempt to answer some of them. Thanks for the questions and thanks to the other presenters as well. So I think in answering the question, we have to go back to one of the things that was also in the chat is how do we define religion? And there's no singular definition of religion, right? That is, it's very important to stress that there is no one agreed upon definition of religion. And for many, the religion is multidimensional. It's both institutional, but it also involves things that you do as an individual. But it's a belief in a higher being. That's one of the common kind of definitions. And a belief in something beyond the human, right? And so that's to anchor that part. That's one of the basic definitions of it. It's this belief in something beyond the human that provides us meaning making, a sense of self and purpose, and all of that. But there's no singular definition. So I'm sure as we go on, we'll see different definitions, especially in the next presentations. And so I'm going to start with the second question first, which was the Jamaica one. Let's rule that one out of the, let's rule that one first. So yes, Jamaica has a high percentage of people who identify as Christians. Yes, to say that is the church involved? There's no singular church. So various religious groups and various Christian churches are involved. Also, various other denominations and other religious groups are also involved in Jamaican society and public life. I don't think that when we look at issues of crime, that we can singularly say or put the blame on religion, right? On any one religious group. Societies our post-colonial modern societies are very complex, and there are various socialization agents in these societies, very competing discourses and competing views and morality that inform and shape people's interaction with each other. And therefore, I think it would be erroneous to say, well, there are so many churches, but so much crime as well. Yes, churches do a part. In fact, one of the biggest involvement of religious groups in the Caribbean, in the Anglophone Caribbean, one of the more active ways in which you see them in public life is through discussions around crime, right? Is one of the most involved ways. Yes, more can be done. And it goes back to what the other speakers have said, because religious groups are not the only socializing agents, interactions in order to address some of these social ills cannot just take place within singular socializing agents. State, as well as religious group, as well as other non-faith and NGOs and civil society groups must work together to address some of these social ills, right? Yes, marginalized people and oppressed people turn to churches. We all know that religion, not to follow Marx too much, but religion can be an opium for those who are oppressed, can be a source of relief, and can be a distraction, and sometimes is the only avenue for interaction and for people to get some kind of relief from the oppression they face and the marginalization, especially when the oppression is faced in other ways. In fact, religious groups within the Caribbean have been some of the drivers of redefining the human. And so I'm looking back at another thing with the chat and linking this. As much as we see and discuss religion in this functionalist approach, I think the decolonial approach to religion is also essential to our space, not only in recognizing how colonialism took place, but the ongoing effects of colonialism and how religion has played a part in responding to that in a positive way, but also reproducing those ongoing coloniality. So going back, I'm going to end with the first question. Is there an opportunity to explore moving beyond religion to responsibility? I'm sure there is, because secularism stresses that there's no need to be religious, or religious has no space in public life. But at the same time, I think that question kind of implies that there is necessarily a binarism between the two, and you can be religious and be responsible. In fact, all the speakers today have pointed out that there are aspects in their religious doctrines that speak about responsibility. I don't think when we speak about spirituality and religion in development that we necessarily have to say everyone has to be religious, because as I said before, you can be spiritual, you can take on the tenets of some of these things without necessarily being religious in the way sociologists define religion as an institutional kind of practice. So I'm going to hand over to the speakers, other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lazarus. I want to acknowledge Pastor Clive and Ms. Eintou, if you all could make your responses as well. Pastor Clive.
Yes, I just want to say that I agree, Dr. Lazarus, in terms of, you know, it looks like if you're religious, whatever the religion, you might not have a sense of responsibility. And I think that is based on your philosophy of religion. In fact, I believe that if you subscribe to a certain array of beliefs in God, etc., and its commandments, then you should be more responsible to take care of the earth, more responsible to reaching out to the oppressed, those who are poor, all right, reaching out to those. I mean, honestly, Chief Hernandez's presentation, along with some others, was quite an eye-opener for me. And I accept that in answer to one of the questions, you know, dialogue has to be intentional. It cannot just be, you know, we meet in a panel, or we say hello on the street, or we meet in a committee. I think there's need for greater intentionality. And I believe what is happening in Trinidad is that I heard at one time that the IRO was the only such group in the world, the one we had in Trinidad. But I'm not sure how effective it is now. You know, how dynamic as an organism it is in the space. And of course, we in religion have to be careful that when we get involved in political issues, you know, people are aware downgrading us and saying we shouldn't get involved, we're taking a side, we're discriminating. And I think that kind of guilt that is placed upon us in religion, we must get rid of it. Honestly, we have to get rid of it. And of course, we have to get rid in the fact that, you know, we have to speak truth to power. I wanted to mention that perhaps our interpretation of our role as religious people, we have got to look at it very carefully. And there's a lot was said, Dr. Mustapha and others, about the issue of equity, the issue of having a concern for those who are marginalized. I think the conversation has to go on. And I would say, apart from religion to responsibility, we must move the conversation to, you know, being proactive and going into the communities, all right? And don't let religion be an obstacle if people belong to another religion. I think in the example of Christ and the Good Samaritan was regarded as the outcast, the religion, you know, that shouldn't be accommodated. And when he, in his parable, in his story of the Good Samaritan, he criticized his own religion and exalted the priests and leaders of the outcast religion. So I think the example of Christ is very phenomenal here. I know a lot about Jamaica. I've been to Jamaica several times. We have a university there. We have Andrews Memorial Hospital there. And there's and Dr. Lazarus is correct. There are several pilot projects in Jamaica and Trinidad too, by the church, in terms of reaching out to gang-infested areas, what we call hotspots. In the case of giving scholarships to people from very depressed areas to our universities and to our secondary schools. And I believe more of that can be done. But I believe it's a work in progress, and we are learning as we dialogue with each other. And I'm sure that I wanted to make one statement about justice. I think in the, let me talk for my own communion and perhaps a lot of Christian communions. I think we don't always take the issue of justice as seriously as we should take it. If you look at the Old Testament, particularly Amos chapter 5, it says as justice run down as waters, you know, and righteousness as a mighty stream. I think we have to do a more crystal clear, dynamic relationship on the ground between righteousness and justice. Because some people feel that you could be righteous and not yet sacrifice your life for the cause of justice. So I think we have to do better, you know, if I should say so. And I don't want to speak for all Christian religions, but I'm saying I think we can do better in proving on the ground, especially in depressed areas, the link between righteousness and justice. I think sometimes we separate them and you know, we kind of discourage youth when we do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Pastor Clive. Miss Eintou.
You're muted.
I want to make a comment on the issue of the Bible. There was a special slave Bible created for my ancestors, which eliminated everything about resistance and promoted the thing about slaves be obedient to your masters. I think that, and there have been many versions of the Bible, so I tend to get confused about accepting that. And there's been a perpetuation of that thing of, you know, saying your prayers, accepting your poverty as the will of God, and all of that. That was my own upbringing in material poverty, you know, which taught you to say a prayer, say a rosary, go to church, thank God for life. And there was a time when our poverty was a catalyst for rebellion and revolution. And then the poverty in the wake of Christianization became a panacea for that poverty and lack of justice that Pastor spoke about. I think there needs to be, and it is happening, there's a recognition by people in the churches, the established churches. The thing of reparation has to start with those established religions that benefited from enslavement. The papal bulls, for example, that gave the right to land and people in this part of the world. So there's a lot that has to be cleared up. We can't go forward. We can't go forward without airing the pain, airing the hurt, airing the lack of justice. I remember when some of us tried to get admitted to the IRO, the Christian churches refused, and it was with the help of my Hindu brothers and sisters again, Maharaj at the time, who helped us mount a campaign to eventually get onto the IRA. But despite the IRO, despite the fact that we are now members of the IRO, you have something like the Prime Minister, a big thing for Day of Thanksgiving. And we are in the IRO, but we are not invited. IRO is an interreligious organization. So, and I want to talk a little bit about responsibility and religion. If we all subscribe to the basic principles, then there would be no dichotomy between responsibility and religion. Although I prefer to say spirituality. And in spirituality, there would be the basic tenets, the basic beliefs, the basic lifestyle modes that would link people, whereas religion is divisive. But if we look at spirituality, then across the board, we can see the basic principles that will link us as we seek to live. I want to talk about the fact about crime and so in the communities. We are losing opportunity to use the arts and culture in those communities to bring sense of self, to bring a sense of self-worth, to help give goals, sense of self, deal with identity issues that have been totally ignored in the education system. They have been totally ignored. So you have people, you have better schools in better areas where children are doing well, and then you have stupid schools in other areas where there's poverty, where the schools do not function well, you know, and so the whole system is set up so that them who has is them who gets, as they just don't say. So there's deep inequality in the society. And religion, in a lot of ways, has been a salve to make people accept this lack of justice. But the younger people are saying, this institution not working for me. So they're moving away from the established churches. And among the young Africans, where their own indigenous spirituality don't have the recognition and visibility, they don't know really what where to turn. But in my own work as a cultural activist, when I work with young people, I see them opening up like flowers when rain falls, when they begin to understand about their ancestors, the greatness of their ancestors, what they have contributed, the ancient civilizations to which they could lay claim, the fact that their own people have spiritualities that exist thousands of years before Christianity, so that they have a choice, not necessarily telling them to initiate there, but they have a choice and they have respect for where they come from. So words like respect, words like recognition, you know, in the society, there is grave level of disharmony and a great level of hypocrisy. And, you know, and the established religions are not helping it. I heard Pastor Dottin speak, he talk about Hinduism, Islam, but I am on this committee and he does not mention my spirituality. I will not be invisible. And all the young people who are rejecting the institutions, maybe by their criminality, they're saying, look at me, recognize me, you know? And yeah.
Oh, all right. So I am trying to be as respectful of time as possible. I know we have a hard stop at 12:30, but I feel as if this forum has opened up a beautiful space, maybe a difficult space to sit in, but a space that is necessary for these types of conversations. So I am mindful that Chief has not had a time to answer and Raviji has not had a time to answer questions, but I'm looking at the time and I'm going to beg of my panelists, because we are going to have a second session in May, if we can move towards the thank yous just for this time, so that we and have almost a pledge of moving forward the conversation, because the conversation is very necessary. So Doc, I see your hand.
I just wanted to pose one question that can inform the conversation going forward for the next panelist, because I know that we're speaking a lot about religion, and I would love to hear okay, how dialogues between religious groups but other groups that are not religious, because I think that religious groups, and you're probably going to hate me for this, have a lot to learn as well, right? About a lot of the social issues that are affecting our society. So when we look at gender and sexualities, I think that's something, and I would love for next conversation for us to hear religious groups. What can feminist organizations do? What can critical race organizations do to assist them as they interpret these things with their spiritual and religious doctrines? But because, you know, it's not just them informing development, but how can they also be shaped to, and that is, I think, is critical. I'm not saying you can't change your ways, because you're here not to serve a higher being, and I understand all of that. But at the same time, I think that the discussion going forward, that would be I would love to see that cross dialogue, because, and it speaks to this underlying anxiety about how are religious groups serving and meeting the needs of youth, right?
So thank you so much for that, Doc. Dr. St. Bernard, you hear, so, I mean, there's a lot of things coming out of this session, but I want to hand over to my former classmate, Donnell, to do the vote of thanks, to thank everybody involved in this forum.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. On behalf of the Sartor Lewis Institute for Social and Economic Studies, I would like to extend our appreciation and our gratitude to all of the panelists for contributing to what was, I think everyone would agree, was a very engaging and thought-provoking session today. I think all of the panelists today demonstrated in their respective presentations the possibility for harmonizing the objectives and the agendas of sustainable development and religiosity/spirituality. And we heard that in order to do so, we need to pay attention to issues of equity and justice and reconciliation. So thank you all. Thank you to Dr. Lazarus, Pastor Dottin, Dr. Mustapha, the Archbishop Gordon, Mr. Ravindra, Nath, Maharaj, Ms. Eintou Springer, and Mr. Hernandez for your presentations today. Thank you to everyone who attended and who participated. We had a very lively comment section today. Thank you for your participation and your engagement. I would also like to thank the SALISES staff who helped to put this forum together today. Ms. Hamilton, Ms. Modest, and Mr. Warner, thank you for your efforts, and also the marketing staff at UWI, in particular, Ms. Green, for her efforts in helping to market today's discussion. I would also like to thank my classmate and chair for the event today, Ms. Teresa Best Downs, for a very smooth and seamless flow of the event today. And last but not least, I would like to extend heartfelt gratitude for Dr. St. Bernard for having the courage to use a word that Pastor Dottin used today, for putting on a discussion like the one we had today. So thank you, and I'll turn you back over now to Teresa, who would give you the closing remarks.
So today, we had a session that for many of us would force us to learn something new, whether it is about the theological background of equity and faith and religion and spirituality of a religious denomination. We had discussions on, the harmony, as it was mentioned, but we also heard a lot of commonality around issues of the environment, around issues of dignity and personhood. There is so much more that can be said up through and with this conversation, with the persons on the panel, with many other persons, many other actors within this sphere. And so I want to thank everyone for being here today. Please look out for more of the SALISES virtual forums. They are always insightful. They are always interesting. They always allow many of the activists and intellectuals in their field to present issues, ideas, and thoughts that are relevant to our day-to-day life. So I want to thank everyone for being here. and we look forward to seeing you at another SALISES forum.